Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Annette Feravich here with you from Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. And don't forget that you can find me on the internet at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. So today I am here to bring you a presentation on loneliness and health. One second here while I just get everything that I want a little bit better centered here. What am I seeing there? Oh, that book. Okay. Okay, there we go. Now I'm a little bit more centered. Let me get that microphone not so prominent there. Let's see if I can move it down. Okay, all right. So if you have been following me, you likely know that I was not here last week. And the reason why I wasn't here last week was because I was in Washington, D.C. I did try and get online with you from D.C., and I have a couple of recordings there that ended up not working out. At the hotel room, they don't always give you the best internet connections, and I had no good internet connection and I had no good way of getting a good internet connection, and so I wasn't able to give you a live video. And so what that means is that we have changed our agenda by pushing back everything by 1 week. All right, so a couple things. So first of all, you know that we are doing our series, and our series is on depression and behavior. And today is episode number 4 that we are doing. And episode number 4 is on loneliness and health. So, why are we focusing on loneliness and health when we're talking about depression and behavior? Well, of course, we know that loneliness contributes to feelings of depression. And what I want to continuously remind you of is this sort of linear relationship that we have. And so loneliness contributes to feelings of depression. And we also know other things also contribute to feelings of depression, such as anxiety. Now, loneliness can stir up feelings of anxiety, of course, because when we are alone, we think about things like what happens if, right? What happens if something happens to me and nobody's around, all right? So those kinds of things create anxiety. What am I going to do tomorrow to fill my day? Those things create anxiety for individuals, right? Even things in particular with social media. What if nobody texts you for a day, right? We know how those kinds of things affect us. And so what we see here is a relationship between loneliness and anxiety. And remember, it's anxiety that leads to depression. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at some of the statistics that we have for loneliness. Let's take a look at our agenda for today. Okay, so loneliness and health is what we're going to be talking about, and its effect on depression. So today's agenda, we're going to take a look at just our new schedule. So the first thing we want to do is look at the new dates that we have, because I was unable to join you last Sunday. Then we want to take a look at the stats that we have relative to what we call a loneliness epidemic. Now, what makes for an epidemic? I just want to stop there for just a minute before I continue on with the agenda and talk about what is it, how is it that we define an epidemic? Now, there are specific definitions that we use. And as you know, I go into sometimes more detail with some of these longer presentations that I give you. And the reason why I do that is because I want you to be able to have a better scientific perspective on some of the things that we're talking about. We have been asked many times in many different ways to trust scientists. And as a scientist, I know that scientists are not always trustworthy. We all have human biases that lead us in directions with our science. And so what I want you to do with some of these presentations is not only learn how to develop a healthier outlook on life, right? Healthier behaviors, but I also want you to begin to develop new ways of thinking, and hopefully these new ways of thinking are going to contribute to new behaviors as well. Okay? All right. So again, but as I started to say, what I'm looking for is for you to also gain a scientific perspective on this so that you can more easily determine what information is valid information, what information is reliable, what information is evidence for the things that we need, right? So where is our evidence? So even though I go into a little bit longer presentation on some of these topics, what I want you to do is I want you to understand the science so you're not simply believing just me, okay? And also remember that our perspective is so that we can develop not only just a healthy mind, but also we want to develop a healthy body as well. So that's why we're talking about loneliness and its association with health. But we also want to develop a healthy spirit as well. And what we find out is that loneliness can deplete our spirits, and in depleting our spirits, what that leads to is feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that we want to look for scientifically so that we can eliminate them using really proven strategies, right? Strategies that have been demonstrated to work for you. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and take another look at this agenda. Okay, and so when we are defining an epidemic scientifically means that what we are facing, like for example with the COVID virus, it's an epidemic. It's a pandemic, in fact. A pandemic means that it is not just localized, pan meaning across, right? So across the globe, we have got this epidemic. An epidemic is something that can fit one of two criteria or both criteria. The two criteria that it fits is, first of all, does it affect a large number of people? And we can see, for example, that the COVID-19 virus does affect a large number of people. That's why it can be categorized as an epidemic or, again, in this case, a pandemic. Another criteria for epidemics, to define something as an epidemic, is that it has a rapid increase as well. So it affects a lot of people, but even if it doesn't affect a lot of people, maybe what it has is a significant increase. We have seen that with the AIDS virus, for example. The AIDS virus, we call that an epidemic. However, even though it was an epidemic, it did not affect a lot of people across the board. It affected only a certain population of individuals generally, right? And what it did do was it affected individuals very quickly. So the increase in individuals who contracted AIDS increased significantly fast. And so that also helped us define an epidemic. So loneliness, we consider that to be an epidemic. We're going to take a look at some of the statistics that make it a loneliness that make loneliness an epidemic. The next item on our agenda is to talk about how loneliness leads to depression. And the vehicle or the mechanism by which this occurs typically is rumination. So we're going to take a closer look at that. And then we want to take a look at health outcomes of loneliness. Health outcomes that affect our mental health, our thinking, health outcomes that affect our immune system, so directly our health, our body, and then also, as we said, health outcomes that affect our spirit. And what that really has to do with is a lot of depression, hopelessness, helplessness, and suicidal ideation. Okay, so that is a spirit that's really lacking any kind of life, is what it's lacking. Okay, and then the last one that we're going to look at for today's agenda is strategies for reducing things like rumination, okay, or strategies for decreasing loneliness. Okay, so our first item on our agenda was that we wanted to take a look at our new agenda. And here is our new agenda. So, we had no show last week, although I tried to get online. I wasn't able to get a good connection. So we didn't have a show last week. And so this week we are on November 14th, Loneliness and Health. Next Sunday at 4 o'clock, we will be looking at anxiety and depression. So again, both loneliness and anxiety lead to depression. Okay? And then for Thanksgiving, this is going to be the Sunday after Thanksgiving instead of the Sunday before Thanksgiving. So a reflection on gratitude and Thanksgiving. And then on December 5th, we are going to be looking at preventing depression during the holidays. All right, so that is our new updated agenda for this series on depression and behavior. Okay, so now let's start with defining depression. No, let's start with defining loneliness. What is loneliness? So we can see there that loneliness defined as a feeling of isolation or disconnectedness. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that I am highlighting in this presentation is that what we need to do is fulfill what has been stated in many of my series that I've had, our number one need. And our number one need is for other people, to be connected to other people, a feeling of belongingness or interrelatedness is what we call this in much of the literature. And so if you are lonely, what you are feeling is disconnected. So right there, we can begin to see what might be some good solutions for eliminating loneliness. And that would be to become engaged, in particular with other people. And in doing so, that should help you eliminate loneliness. It will also help stir some of the reward centers in our brain, such as creating dopamine, for example. I've talked about that when I talked about the last series on antidepressants and how they affect our brain, but also in series number 2 on that we've had, or episode number 2 in this series. So keep in mind, one of our strategies for eliminating feelings of loneliness is to find connections. But what we need are real connections. So in defining loneliness, first of all, we know that there is an element of subjective or opinion about being lonely. We know that there are many people who can be surrounded by others, and yet they still feel lonely. We also know that some people could be surrounded by no one and be happy and content and not feel lonely, right? I live alone by myself here, and I have had many quiet moments in my house with no TV, no music, no anything. And I can feel very lonely, but I don't. Most often, I don't feel very lonely. And what is the reason that I don't feel very lonely? Because there are so many things that I'm engaged in, right? So I am connected through being engaged with my students, being engaged with my business, being engaged with you, even you online here, I'm engaged with, right? Okay, so that helps prevent loneliness. But loneliness is an opinion. Nobody could tell you you're not lonely. Look at all the people who love you, right? And very often we see that, don't we? We see individuals who kind of say, try and cheer other people up and get them out of their loneliness by reminding them of all the people that surround them. That's the reason why we have an episode on gratitude. Because gratitude really, and the belief that the people around you can help fulfill you and keep you connected, really is a belief that we have that is all our own, right? And so by being connected, we begin to feel that belief as opposed to just simply cognitively wanting to understand the belief. Subjective talks about the feelings that I have in here, despite the cognitive knowledge I have of other people around me. Okay, and that is point number 2 that we have there for defining loneliness. So first of all, like we said, loneliness is subjective. It is my own opinion. But there also is a cognitive component to loneliness. We can help through mindful behavioral cognitive therapy, through purposeful thinking and purposeful cognitive behaviors. We can help step ourselves out of loneliness. So we're going to be making sure that we talk about those today as well. Now, as you can see on that little list that I have there, I have got the phrase there, self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm not talking about subjective and cognitive ideas about loneliness, or I don't have that listed, although that's what I'm talking about, all right? Self-fulfilling prophecies demonstrate the power of the mind relative to loneliness. If you are a person who believes that as you get into your older age, that people are no longer interested in you, that people will no longer find you, worthy of a phone call, right? They won't find you interesting. Like I said, they won't find you worthy enough to give you, to go out of their way to talk to you. And so there are a lot of people who have preconceived ideas about what old age brings. Other people have ideas that in old age, I have wisdom to pass on to my children. So I'm sure that they would want to listen to me and want to listen to my wisdom. And even if that may not be the case, my grandchildren likely will want to listen to me, right? My grandchildren will take my words of wisdom to heart. I will always remain healthy and active. And in doing so, that means that I will go out of my way to see people, to meet with people and engage, right? If you see elderly life as being one where you are still engaged in life, then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You remain engaged in life because you believe that you're going to be engaged in life, right? Okay, and then the last point that I have there is that anyone can be lonely. Anyone can be lonely. So loneliness is not biased in who finds themselves lonely. And so we know that loneliness can strike regardless of gender, and we have mixed data regarding who tends to be more lonely. What we seem to find is that men seem to be more lonely in the loss of a relationship. Okay, so men seem to be lonely with regards to actual relationships. And therefore, men find themselves needing or wanting or moving into relationships more often than women do. However, in old age, we find that, first of all, women live longer than men. And secondly, women don't have the resources that men often have. And so in older ages, women tend to be more lonely than men because they are more often widowed, and they are more often widowed without resources. All right, so we see gender differences in loneliness. We also see that loneliness can affect individuals at all income levels, right? You do not buy, or you cannot buy yourself out of loneliness. Rich people are not less lonely than poor people, of course. We also know the same thing with education. So income, gender, education really has no bearing on individuals who are affected by feelings of loneliness. Let's see here. Also, circumstances contribute to loneliness as well. So, life-changing circumstances can contribute to loneliness. But this also goes to show you that it is perception that contributes to it as well. Let me give you an example. So some students might find themselves particularly lonely when they go off to college, right? But that can be influenced by perception. Of course, some people are very excited to go off to college and are looking at making new friends. Other individuals are more sad or nostalgic about going off to college, in that they might feel that they're missing some of their old friends and some of their old experiences, right? Okay. So, couples getting divorced also. So again, what we are finding is we are finding that circumstances contribute to our feelings of loneliness, but those can also be based on perception. So, are you looking forward to a new life, or are you depressed because your spouse left you and also found a new mate and you don't have a new mate, right? So, all of those kinds of things can influence our perceptions of whether or not we are lonely. All right. So, but loneliness does not select based on gender, based on income, based on ethnicity, based on education, those kinds of things. So in other words, loneliness does not discriminate. Now let's take a look at some loneliness statistics. So first of all, what we know is that approximately 50% of elderly individuals experience loneliness. Okay? Now, loneliness Now, loneliness does tend to affect older individuals. However, what we are seeing is that it is increasingly affecting younger groups of individuals. So individuals in their mid to late teens are experiencing the highest percentages of loneliness. We see that loneliness is increased by significant amounts, so much so that individuals are now assigning what they call, for example, czars, to study loneliness in different countries. So England has hired some experts on loneliness and a minister of loneliness to take a look at these increasing trends in loneliness. So, for example, from 2016 to 2017, what we have seen is a 49% increase in the number of individuals over 50 who are experiencing loneliness. In total, about 45% of all adults experience some form of loneliness. Let's see here. And what we have also found out is that, again, elderly individuals, but also individuals who are disabled, experience a higher percentage of loneliness. Again, elderly individuals, more so because they are not engaged. They don't have the same kinds of relationships that younger individuals have. But this new phenomenon that we are seeing with individuals who are between the ages of about 16 and 20 years old are experiencing the highest rates of loneliness. In one study, they took a look at 22,000 individuals, and what they found was that the loneliest population of individuals were those people who still lived with their parents. And so that's one of the reasons why we see that younger generation experiencing greater bouts of loneliness. In 1984, individuals on average said that they had approximately three confidants, right? Three close friends, for example. In 2004, individuals on average, 0 was the most common answer for these individuals who are experiencing loneliness. Okay. Yeah, I think that's about it. We do see that the individuals who are of a lower income, although individuals who are a higher income can also experience loneliness, as we've said. Individuals who are in poverty experience more loneliness. Okay? All right. Let me see if I want to talk about any other statistics. Yeah, ages of young adults who are experiencing the greatest amount of loneliness is between the ages of 16 and 24. We also know that individuals who experience poor health also experience greater loneliness, report greater feelings of loneliness. Renters, as opposed to homeowners, experience more loneliness. Individuals who feel that they are connected to their neighborhood feel less bouts of loneliness. Individuals who are widowed are experiencing greater bouts of loneliness. Single, unmarried individuals also have greater bouts of loneliness, and we also know that these are also indicators of poorer health. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that's good for the statistics on loneliness. Okay, so let's move on then. Now, this slide just talks about the disease model that we used to take a look at and what we used to follow to understand disease. And this disease model basically said that disease was caused by something outside of the body, like, for example, a virus, right? Or a bacteria or a parasite. So those things came outside the body, and medicine then got rid of that disease that was breaking down the body. Now, today, the new disease model takes a look at disease that is caused more often by our reactions to stress. So we've talked about stress in previous videos and previous episodes in this series, so you want to take a look at that. But what we're saying here is that loneliness causes internal disruptions because what it causes is stress in the individual. All right, so one of the ways that loneliness causes stress for the individual is through a process that is called rumination. And what is rumination? Rumination is the constant thinking and rethinking of negative events. And this can happen in a number of ways. But what we usually do when we ruminate is we end up trying to recreate outcomes that we have not experienced. And in recreating these outcomes that we haven't experienced, what we end up doing then is creating feelings, negative feelings of desperation, of helplessness, of hopelessness. When we feel that we cannot change our outcomes, and when outcomes are in the past, we can't change those outcomes. What do we do when we think about these things in unhealthy ways? What we are doing is we are ruminating, going over and over negative events in ways that we are trying to change the facts. We call that counterfactual thinking. Individuals engage in counterfactual thinking, which is part of the rumination process. And if you remember from last week, what we said is that creates these different pathways. And these pathways are habitual pathways that we use over and over again, just like highways that we begin to think very quickly and very automatically and without any conscious thought. So rumination takes us down these negative thinking pathways without any conscious thought. And so right away, what we know we can do in order to stop these concepts or stop these ideas of loneliness is that we need to make conscious efforts to stop our rumination. Because what ends up happening when we don't make these conscious efforts is not only do we end up experiencing habitual thoughts that then take us down these negative thinking pathways, but what they begin to do is instigate changes in our bodies. And this is what we've talked about also in last week's episode, or actually in the last episode, number 3, where we talked about antidepressants, and we've also talked about it with depression and behavior in episode number 2. So some of the things that we learned about loneliness and changes in the body were from Dr. Renee Spitz. And Dr. Renee Spitz taught us something about loneliness. This is approximately 40 years ago when she discovered what is called marasmus. And what that is it's a wasting away from malnutrition that occurs when an infant suddenly loses their mother. And so what we begin to see here is automatic biological responses to extreme feelings of here separation, right? Separation and loss of attachment. About 1/3 of infants died in what they called fondling homes. And what these are basically institutions for children who were abandoned, or children who lost their mothers or their parents. And what they saw regarding this wasting away of these infants who had suddenly lost their mothers was that they would end up refusing to eat, and even when they were force fed, they would eventually die. And again, these infants died when they were in these institutions, which has a lot to do with some of the findings that we had, for example, from James Lynch on the broken heart, the medical consequences of loneliness. And what we found is that in these findings from 1977, Lynch found that infants who were put in institutional care, they compared those to their mothers that had mental deficiencies. So, what Lynch did was studied infants who were put in institutions when they had mothers who were by definition incapable of taking care of them. Okay? And so these were mothers typically who had IQs that Lynch was looking at that had IQs under 70. An average IQ is 100. And so these mothers had significant mental deficits. And so it was thought, in particular in the 1950s, that it was better for the infants to be institutionalized than to be cared for by their mothers. And so what they took a look at was the health outcomes of children who were institutionalized. Now remember, what Spitz ended up finding out was that when these infants were detached from their mothers, there were grave consequences as far as nutrition goes and other traumatic outcomes for that infant. What Lynch found out was, in comparing infants who were raised in the institution compared to infants who were raised with their biological mothers who were mentally deficient, as we see, right? Which one ended up having better health outcomes? And what they found was that as far as IQ goes, infants that were raised in the institution lost on average 26 IQ points. That's extraordinary. That is an extraordinary outcome of this loss of attachment, right? The loss of a caregiver at a young age. For those that were raised with their biological mother, even though their biological mother had great mental deficits, an average IQ of 70, those infants on average raised their IQ approximately 29 points. Again, extraordinary information, and you can begin to see the effects of feelings of being detached or feelings of loneliness that it has on health. We know that loneliness affects health more so than individuals who smoke on average 15 cigarettes a day. That's how much loneliness affects health. And I'll give you some of those links in my in the video, not only in the video but in the comments section there. I'll give you the links for some of this information if you're looking for it. We also know that 30 years later they followed those infants who were raised in an institution compared with their biological but mentally deficient mothers, and what they found was that all of those who were institutionalized were still institutionalized 30 years later. So they were never able to get out of the institution. Many of them were dead, and most of them advanced only to the 3rd grade. compared to those infants that were raised by their biological mother. And all of those infants, all of them who were raised by their biological mother, were all self-supporting. Compared to those who were raised in the institution, all of those were still institutionalized. This is extraordinary. So we can see the necessity and real bonding and real attachment and the necessity for strong relationships right from the very beginning, right? Most of those children who were raised with their biological mother had a high school diploma, and also a few of them had 1 year or more of college. So real extraordinary findings on that. Okay. Now, let's talk about then the mechanisms by which these health changes might occur. Because when we take a look at lonely feelings, or when we take a look at any condition, what they're calling it here is a factor. When we look at any factor that is related to our health, we need to better understand the mechanism by which it creates that health deficit. We can't just say smoking is, for example, related to lung cancer. We need to be able to find out the mechanism by which that occurs. And so, for example, one of the mechanisms by which that would occur is the fact that smoke gets into the lungs. And so, smoking and cancer is most often localized. It is most often localized to the lung. So we can see what is the mechanism by which smoking causes lung cancer. Well, smoking gets into the lungs, causes tumors, and then therefore we end up getting lung cancer. Okay? All right. And of course, that is a very, primitive explanation of that, right? Not a lot of detail on that. But the point here is that what we need to do is understand the mechanisms by which loneliness produces changes in the body. Okay? All right. So what we look at, first of all, our first item there is a correlation. Is there a correlation between the factor and the disease? In that, when the factor, in this case, loneliness, is present, does the disease get worse? We're going to take a look more closely at that. Then we also want to take a look at the mechanism by which it makes our health worse or pathological. So how does loneliness worsen our bodily systems? All right, so we're going to take a look at that as well. And then what we do is take a look at, do interventions when we decrease the factor, in this case loneliness, does that then lead to a positive result, a decrease in disease? All right, so let's take a look at all of those factors, starting first of all with correlation. Now here again, correlation is when the factor is present, loneliness, in this case, that's the factor, the disease is worse. And what we see here is these are stressors that are caused by loneliness, these are health outcomes that are caused by the stress of loneliness. And so what we see here is in 55 to 58% of cases where individuals come in and say that they have persistent fatigue, that is related to the stress caused by loneliness, for example. Insomnia, there's a correlation in 87% of cases where we see stress due to loneliness. Fainting, 47% of individuals. Constipation, 45% in the cases. So once again, these are individuals who are going in to see the doctor and who are reporting these, and we see that they also have a case of loneliness as well. Heart palpitations, 40%. Shortness of breath, 33% of individuals. Diarrhea, 29%. Numbness, 28%. Chest pain, 28%. Dizziness, 48%. 56% have menstrual problems or premenstrual syndrome. 62% have multiple allergies. And 91%, and this is the most prominent case, the most common diagnosis is irritable bowel syndrome or gastro gastrointestinal problems. I'm looking at this gastroenterology. But gastrointestinal problems is the number one problem that individuals end up have with this disease of loneliness. So we see a correlation between diseases. We know that correlation is not causation. However, this gives us some strong evidence that loneliness does affect these kinds of diseases or makes our diseases worse. Okay, now the next thing, so we took a look at correlations here. The next thing we want to take a look at are the mechanisms. So what are the mechanisms that end up creating pathological or disease problems when loneliness is a factor? And this is what I wanted to present on this slide. What we see here, or what we know is that we see changes first of all in our nervous system, both our central nervous system and in our peripheral nervous system. So when individuals are lonely, what are the mechanisms that change? Well, the first thing is that we see a dysregulation in our fight or flight mechanisms. And we can see here from this picture, which I'm going to blow up for you, that when we end up activating what's called the sympathetic division or sympathetic nervous system, what we end up doing is getting our fight or flight responses ready to go. So we get oxygen and blood flowing to our lungs and to our muscles. The opposite occurs when we are relaxed. So what we end up doing is then activating our digestive systems, and also we end up feeling more content when our parasympathetic nervous system is activated. This becomes dysregulated. So dysregulated means that we are becoming anxious and activating our sympathetic nervous system when it's not appropriate to activate it, and it stays activated for longer periods of time. So what does loneliness do? The first thing is the mechanism by which it creates disease is it dysregulates our autonomic nervous system, our system that is ready for fight or flight, and we can no longer relax like we should and be content and rest and digest. So we see a great correlation here then with gastrointestinal diseases that we have at 91% when they're associated with loneliness and the stress of loneliness. When we see combinations of these diseases that we have listed, we know that the individual is most likely also experiencing anxiety, depression, or other mental distress that's associated with loneliness. Okay, and then finally, what we want to do is we want to look at whether or not strategies or improvements can really help us then decrease the health outcomes that are associated with loneliness. So let's take a look at some of the strategies that are related to decreasing feelings of loneliness. So the first strategy here that I want to talk about is mindfulness based cognitive therapy, MBCT. Now, a lot of times we talk about cognitive therapy, and I happen to think that cognitive therapy is good therapy, however, it has its limitations. One of the limitations is that we can change our thoughts, but we don't necessarily change our beliefs when we change our thoughts. So those are some of the limitations of any kind of cognitive behavioral therapy. However, when we are taking a look at mindfulness based cognitive behavioral therapy, what we are looking at is we are looking at what it says here is the development of deep insight into the nature of mental processes, consciousness, identity, and reality, and the development of optimal states. So, what are we trying to do through this mindful meditation? We are trying to develop more optimal, higher thinking states. One of the things that is advantageous to understanding what strategies really benefit us is what is called metacognition. What is metacognition? Metacognition is an understanding of how your own mind works. Metacognition is understanding what are the things that you need to do to learn or understand. Okay, so what we're trying to do right now is give you different strategies for reducing loneliness and also hopefully recognizing loneliness in other individuals so you can help reduce loneliness in them as well. And in doing so, then, what we want to do is give you these different strategies that then can change the way that we think or approach ideas of loneliness, right? So that we are not creating self-fulfilling prophecies. Okay, all right. So changing and purposefully changing, intentionally changing the way that we think, this mindful meditation actually then changes, in the process we see changing actual heart beliefs. So not just working on our mind, but an advantage of this mindful meditation is that it actually changes beliefs we see inside as well. So beliefs about our ability to make friends, beliefs that we see about our willingness to engage in life. Okay? All right. Can't read what that says. So when we are looking at mindful meditation, there are several different ways that we can meditate. Some of these meditations are used more in Western societies, but some of the meditations are used more in Eastern societies. Those meditations actually that are used more often, you might want to take a look at those that are used more often in Eastern culture, because those have more to do with generating positive thoughts as opposed to being passive in your mindfulness experience. And that is going to change the outcomes that you experience as well, the health outcomes and the health benefits. Okay, so what do we know to be some of these health outcomes or health benefits of mindful meditation? Okay, well, what we do is we have seen stress reduction in, like we see here, hospital patients. We have seen also medical students develop more empathy towards their patients. We have seen teachers have a higher focus on awareness and getting their students to become more aware and present. We have also seen teachers who have engaged in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy also have greater acceptance of different kinds of students. Individuals are also better able to approach problem solving after they have engaged in this mindfulness based cognitive therapy because they are more willing to accept problems that they can't change. And they become also more aware of the occurrences that created, for example, problems of loneliness. So, mindful meditation actually has some exponential rewards that really are not apparent just simply from the practice of the mindful meditation, but actually we see that the benefits become exponential or multiplicative in many different areas of our lives. What we know is that mindful meditation increases activity in the prefrontal areas of our brain. So areas right here, which really are our higher order thinking, decision making, and problem solving. So we see greater activity and greater activity across all areas of the brain for individuals who engage in mindful meditation. And so this is not necessarily an external engagement, but what it does is it creates those positive feedback loops in our brain and in our body for hormones and activation also of things like adrenaline, right, and cortisol and our stress hormones. When we become lonely, when we become anxious, as we've said, these mechanisms become dysregulated. And what mindful meditation helps us do is it helps us better regulate our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest, so that we are breathing more deeply and engaging that system more readily, so that in engaging that system, what we begin to do is regulate thoughts and emotions more consciously and more automatically in a healthy way. It starts through a conscious process to change the regulation of our body. And in changing the regulation of our body, we become more engaged in life. And in becoming more engaged in life, we decrease feelings of loneliness. Okay? All right, now let's take a look at some of the physical changes we see and physical improvements we see from mindful meditation compared to other types of strategies. So, giving individuals information on, for example, how to make new friends or how to become more engaged in life actually increased physical symptoms instead of decreasing physical symptoms, and increased also doctor visits is what we're looking at. So utilization there in 6 months, how often did they utilize doctor visits? How much did they feel mental distress? And how much did they experience physical symptoms? We can see that individuals who just experienced mindful meditation also had fewer visits to the doctor, had fewer visits to the doctor, and also had fewer physical symptoms. They decreased physical symptoms by 14%. So this is really extraordinary. And then finally, when there was cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive therapy along with mindful meditation, we can see that the mental distress decreased significantly, but physical symptoms decreased by approximately 35%, and hospital visits decreased by approximately 68%. So, mindful meditation and practicing mindful meditation, you can learn a lot from the internet on how you can practice mindful meditation. but we see that mindful meditation really makes some significant changes in our health. And so even though we may not have increased, for example, our numbers of social support, we can see here that just through what we might also call a process of self-soothing, we can change our feelings of loneliness and change our health conditions as well. Okay. Now let's take a look at some different ways that we get social support. So here are 4 different ways that we can get social support. When we're feeling lonely, when we are in need, we can get, for example, I'm going to start with number 2, instrumental support. So instrumental support is that actual tangible support, right? So this might be the support that we can get from food banks, for example, or it might be the support that we can get from somebody who is willing to help us with our lawn, for example. So that's instrumental support. And instrumental support is, of course, very valuable. That can help relieve lots of feelings of anxiety. I know right now, especially during this time of year, I need fall cleanup on my yard right now. And of course, as you know, I lost my husband. And so this creates a lot of anxiety. And think about that then. The anxiety can also be related to things like nobody's around here to help me. If I only had some help with some of these things I need to get done. And so we know that instrumental support can be very valuable support for individuals. However, it is not the emotional support that we need. Number 1 there. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Number 3 is informational support. And so this, of course, is that we need information from knowledgeable people, right? So, for example, if we aren't sure about some of the outcomes or scientific findings related to COVID-19, we might need some more information, right? And so informational support can help me make decisions, and especially when the informational support is honest support that I can get, right? Honest, truthful science. The more, however, that informational support really isn't helpful to me or really is incomplete, the less I'm going to feel supported by that information, right? So the less I'm going to go to that informational support if that information is faulty information. Okay. This informational support can also be things like pamphlets. It can be information from your doctor. It can be advice from your friend, though, as well, right? So that's informational support. The 4th kind of support that we have there is appraisal support. And appraisal support is giving an individual constructive feedback, all right? Now, this is very helpful for individuals, right? So giving them feedback on the idea that, well, if you engaged in life more, you wouldn't be so lonely, right? Or if you didn't sit in front of the TV. Now, some of this sounds critical, but a lot of times, if you think realistically, that's how we give information to one another, right? We sometimes give information in critical kinds of ways. And so we can see where information that is of appraisal nature can make other people feel somewhat anxious about the information that we're getting, right? Because you're judging me is what you're doing. Appraisal information or appraisal support is giving me some kind of critical feedback. Now, it's not to say that we don't need that. And it's not to say that we shouldn't look at that kind of feedback in honest ways. I'm a person who is a realist, and I want, even when I went to go visit my girlfriend, I wanted the real scoop on how she was doing. It's better for me and the way that I think to have that real information. Okay. But some people, they don't want that kind of information. It makes them more anxious. So know the kind of appraisal information that you need, but that does give some people, like me, for example, support. All right, the first one there that we have listed as social support is emotional support. And this is the support that we most often need, and the kind of support that is related to the health outcomes. The kind of support that leads to feelings of helplessness, that leads to feelings of loneliness, that leads to feelings of hopelessness, or the kind of support that leads us out of those kinds of feelings, that make us feel that we belong, that help us feel secure in our relationships. Okay, so that's emotional support. Empathy, we feel like somebody is nurturing to us, we feel like somebody cares for us, and that is the type of support that alleviates feelings of loneliness. We also know that a strong social support system affects things not only like feelings of loneliness, but the reason and the mechanism by which it affects health is because it also affects things like sleep. It also affects things like exercise, and it also affects things like substance abuse, for example. And in particular, substance abuse for women, not so much for men, though. Okay. Now, this slide talks about, I know it looks a little complicated, but I wanted you to have a slide there that had some of the information about the health consequences, so you had that right there in front of you. And so what you can see here then, if you take a look at some of those health consequences, is that loneliness increases things like coronary heart disease. We can see that unmarried and individuals without close friends were more likely to increase their death rate by 50% within 5 years, compared to 17% for individuals who were married and who had close friends. Number 2 there, it also has an impact on blood pressure. Individuals who are engaged in life, what they do is they increase their heart rate in positive ways so that arteries are open for blood flow. But individuals who feel more anxious close their arteries and arteries that are restricted as opposed to open. Arteries that are restricted as opposed to open, when our blood increases, that relates to higher blood pressure, and that also relates to then heart disease as well. Individuals who, again, are lonely are less likely to sleep, and in particular, they are less likely to experience what is called restorative sleep, that during sleep our body repairs, and for lonely individuals they are less likely to have their bodies repaired. We can see also that it increases epinephrine, and epinephrine is adrenaline. So again, these increases in epinephrine contribute to dysregulation of our sympathetic nervous system. We also see that it causes spikes in inflammation. We see that individuals who are lonely have an increased risk of dying of cancer. It is linked to Alzheimer's disease, and I want to show you something about our thinking and how it's related. Well, actually, I'm going to keep going. We can see that it just depends on the research and when, but women can be 1.5 times more likely and men 3 times more likely to die prematurely when they are lonely. And this also contributes to suicide. loneliness and social isolation. And also contributes to parents separating earlier on, contributes to these kinds of health outcomes, as well as these kinds of suicidal ideations, loneliness, and social isolation. And then also we see changes in the NKC is our natural killer cells, and those natural killer cells are what target tumors and cancer. Now, what I want you to take a look at is I want you to take a look at this study that was done by Cohen here in 2007 when they were taking a look at loneliness. And what they did was they took a look at immune cells, and immune cells that were in what they called lonely people, or they called them here isolated individuals, compared to integrated individuals. And the very first thing that we see here when taking a look at these immune cells is that they are represented in completely opposite ways for isolated individuals compared to integrated individuals. And we can see here that when integrated individuals have immunity that's red, that's indicated by red, isolated individuals have immunity indicated by green, and vice versa. So what does this mean here? Well, here what we have is we have on the left side, we have increases in disease. And so when we see green, that is overexpressing that immunity that is shown there. So immunity that's related to increases in disease is overexpressed or upregulated in isolated individuals, but it's downregulated or underexpressed in integrated or social individuals. And we can see here when the immune cell is indicating a decrease in disease, that is, or basically the immunity is activating to decrease disease, we see that's when integrated or social individuals are overexpressing that. So overexpressing the immunity activation for decreasing a disease, while individuals who are isolated or lonely are underexpressing decrease in immunity. And so we can see here some very direct relationships with loneliness So we can see some very direct relationships with loneliness and our immune system. All right, moving on. What are some of our solutions? So we already took a look at mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and we saw that as a great solution. What are some other solutions? Well, other solutions in particular for older folks, although this is helpful for all of us as well. When we are engaged, what we want to do is we want to engage in using what is called fluid intelligence. In this chart we see here on engagement, we see that over time our fluid intelligence decreases while crystallized intelligence stays intact. Crystallized intelligence is knowledge we've learned for facts, right? So facts that we have about presidents, facts that we have about birthdays, facts that we have about location, geography, facts that we have about gender differences. All of that is crystallized intelligence. That's our facts. But what keeps our minds fresh and keeps us engaged is fluid intelligence. That is the intelligence that we use in conversations. And this is the reason why engagement is so important, and also decreases things like dementia and Alzheimer's. Because when we are engaged with other people, we are using both memory and knowledge at the same time in an interactive way. And that interactive thinking and engagement that we're doing is basically using and getting that rustiness out of our thinking, so that we are well-oiled thinking machines, is what that's doing. So if you want to keep, again, I've said this in previous episodes, if you want to keep, for example, your grandparents from experiencing Alzheimer's and dementia, you want to keep them talking. You want to keep them engaged in conversation. And the same thing is going to go for those 16 to 24-year-olds who are experiencing loneliness and at increased levels as well. Keep them talking. Keep them engaged in life one way or another. So even if they're alone, they're using fluid intelligence, knowledge, memory, maybe because I'm working on a project, right? Maybe because I'm alone, but I'm doing this YouTube video. So I'm using fluid intelligence even when I'm alone, all right? So another way for 16 to 24-year-olds to reduce those feelings of loneliness, since you are experiencing it more than any other age group. Okay. Another interesting solution that I came across in doing some of this research and reminding myself of some of the research is I was just looking at some other data that I had here, is how beneficial it is to have pets. And so individuals found out the benefits of pets on health early on in the 1950s by accident. And so a doctor brought in jingles, and it improved patients, not only their emotions, their positive emotions and their outlook, but actually improved health outcomes. We know that that pets have also improved, for example, trust in physicians. So they looked at how trustworthy physicians were when they had a kennel of dogs. Well, hopefully not in the physician's office, right? They also found out that individuals who had pets lived longer after experiencing heart attacks, that it decreased death rates by approximately 1/3 of those individuals who had heart attacks. It lowered heart rates, and these individuals also had fewer doctor visits, and they also had lower blood pressure. We found that individuals, when they are with their pets, have slower heart rates. And so what this means is pets are helping individuals activate their parasympathetic nervous system, their rest and digest system. So once again, this is helping with any kind of dysregulation that individuals have of their stress system, right? Of their fight or flight system. We found that individuals who had fish as pets also experienced some of the same benefits as individuals who had cats or dogs. Individuals who had pets also had lower triglycerides and also had lower levels of cholesterol. And we also know that allowing criminals to care for pets reduced suicidal ideation to almost non-existent. So this is really a wonderful type of therapy to help individuals feel less lonely. Are you getting close to your pet? Do you have a pet? I do. My pet is little Lucy, who's over there. And I'm going to tell you, it has really been really a great experience for me, and it has been so, what's the right word I'm looking for here? It's been so beneficial to me to come home and have Lucy here. And when I was in Washington D.C., my sister was watching my dog, and I didn't have her here for a couple days, and I was always sad when I was reminded that she wasn't here with me. Let's see here. Yeah, and if I didn't say this, individuals who had pets had a 33% decrease in death rate compared to individuals who did not. Okay. Mm. I actually did not put up the slide that I really wanted to put up. I probably can though. Okay. What I wanted to end with was this model, which is called a flow model. And Mikhaili Csikszentmihalyi is the author of flow and the concept of flow, and he recently passed away. And you can find some probably much more current information or more current information on the concept of flow if you're interested, in particular because he recently passed away. So he's been highlighted, and his concept has been highlighted significantly on the internet. And so this concept of flow really is talking about the benefits that we get from being engaged in life. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to ask you, today's question. And today's question is, how do you experience flow in your life? How do you get engaged in life? And then are you understanding the metacognitive advantages of being engaged in life? Okay? All right, so you're like, metacognitive advantages. I don't know what you're talking about, Dr. Feravich. Let's take a look at this. Are you engaged in life? So this concept here of flow, you can see that what we are trying to do is we are trying to reach the highest abilities that we have. So utilizing our best abilities along with challenging ourselves to the greatest extent. And you can see here then what we do is experience what is called flow. And this is a being in the zone. It is, and I've talked to you about this in episodes in the past. So take a look at that. But for our purposes here, also take a look at some of the other feelings that we have when we, for example, have low abilities but high challenges. When we're not up for the task, we feel anxiety. When we end up using our abilities, right? So having some moderate abilities but very low challenges, we end up being very bored, right? Depressed. That we have no challenge in life that we are taking a look at. And so what we want to do in order to eliminate feelings of loneliness is we want to experience those feelings of flow. And again, what that is ultimate engagement in with whatever we're doing. Now, we realize that in order to feel less lonely, we need to be engaged with people. And we also want to do that in order for us to keep that mind going, right? To keep those healthy pathways in our mind away from rumination and more towards new and fresh ideas, right? That keep us stimulated. Okay? So what we want to do is we don't only have to engage with people. We can also engage with activities. I mean, think about if you went downhill skiing by yourself, but really worked at mastering your skills. That would keep you engaged as well, and that also provides you the benefits of staying engaged. Okay? All right, so don't forget what we are doing. That's what I have for you today on our episode of Loneliness and Health. So hopefully I've inspired you to come outside of yourself and become a little bit more engaged with other people. There are numerous benefits, and we really can pull you out of feelings of depression when we make efforts to become engaged, when we make efforts to consciously stop ruminating, right? So that's what I'm trying to teach you, to try and change your behaviors so that you can consciously change your levels of depression. This is Dr. Annette Feravich from Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit, and I have not updated my website in about a month, but I want you to know that if you are feeling depressed, if you are feeling like you just really cannot get motivated to get engaged in life, one of the first things that you want to take a look at is you're going to want to take a look at nutrition and having a good multivitamin. Okay, so make sure that you have a good multivitamin. And also come and see me if you are having issues such as gastrointestinal problems that are associated with loneliness. There are a lot of things that I can do that would help you feel more physically motivated and help you feel more mentally motivated when we change our bodies and get our bodies healthier as well. One of the things I didn't quite address more directly was that spiritual aspect. And what we find when individuals are lonely, the spiritual aspect the spiritual kinds of consequences that we experience when we feel lonely have to do with feelings of spiritual emptiness, feelings of lack of motivation, right? When we have our spirit, and our spirit is being fed with life, engaging in life, we do decrease feelings of helplessness. We begin to master things. And in mastering things, what we end up doing is edifying our spirit, building our spirit so that we don't have a spirit of loneliness and helplessness and hopelessness. Okay? And always for me, then it boils down to when I am alone, whether or not I have a relationship with always things outside of myself. But in particular, for spiritual health, do I have a relationship with my higher power? And who is your higher power? That fills emptiness to a great degree. No, not to a great degree. It fills emptiness that people feel completely because it stops the search all the time for those things that simply cannot fulfill us. Okay? All right, Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit, and that's all that I have for you today. Please make sure that you join me for our next presentation on November 21st on anxiety and depression. And so we will show you then how anxiety actually is a precursor to depression. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next Sunday at 4 o'clock, or around 4 o'clock. I hope to see you November 21st. All right, thanks.